from abstract submission to paper submission to registration to travel and all the stuff. Even the schedule, which is one of the important things people want to see, that where is the presentation, who is presenting and all this stuff. We have prepared a mobile applications, but the thing is that few people don't have the smartphones and all these things. So we'll keep few of the printouts in the registration desk, maybe after this session, after the inaugural session. So, and it was pasted in all the notice boards, that is fine, but if you want a printout copy, please just tell the registration desk, they will help you, and we'll keep some printouts. Now, regarding the sessions, we have keynote speakers from various places, and 96 papers and 24 sessions. 4 parallel sessions will be going on in the B block, in the second floor, room number 211, 201, 202 and 205. There will be a book exhibitions by Sage Publications, just in the same lobby. There are photo exhibitions. And apart from that, today we have a cultural program after dinner. Dinner will be here in the cafeteria. After dinner we have a cultural program. It's a band performance. So band will be coming from Delhi. They are on the way also. The band name is Ayud. And tomorrow we have a conference dinner at Central Park. And we'll be closing by Tuesday, and which will be by 4:30 or 5. Those who are interested to go to Agra, as we have already announced, and some people have shown their interest, it will be on 5th of March, it will be on Wednesday. So vehicle will start in the early morning from Gwalior, and it will return to Gwalior around evening. So this is the more course of actions for this conference, and I think they have arrived, they are calling me. So formally we are going to start this program. Thank you.
A room filled with people who have immense motivation to discuss matters that are utmost importance for the development of our society. Welcoming all of you in the International Conference on Environment, Technology and Sustainable Development, organized by Atal Bihari Vajpayee Indian Institute of Information Technology and Management, Gwalior, in collaboration with Center for Ecological Economics and Natural Resources, Institute for Social and Economic Change, and College of Arts and Sciences in University of San Francisco, supported by Indian Council of Social Science Research and a Research Committee on Environment and Society, and Sage Publications. The mission of this conference is to provide an interactive platform for inspired individuals who are passionate to promote the open exchange of ideas on the changing trends in the current environment and technology to strive for sustainable development. The conference offers an interdisciplinary forum for all participants to discuss based on themes and sub-themes and scrutinize the opportunities of a sustainable and balanced society. Moving on to a brief background. This conference has its origins in the kinds of spontaneous and creative moments that emerge in the informal spaces between the sessions and presentations of an academic conference. Dr. Pradip Swarnakar was attending on 2nd ISA Forum of Sociology on Social Justice and Democratization in Buenos Aires, Argentina in August 2012. During an impromptu meal with members of the Research Committee on Environment and Society, Dr. Swarnakar raised the idea of holding an international conference at his home institution, ABV-IIITM, and in Madhya Pradesh. At the time, the idea was loosely organized around the concept of bringing together social scientists exploring the roles and the science and technology play in environment change and sustainable development. The idea was interesting enough to the past RC24 President Raymond Murphy and Stuart Lockey that Dr. Swarnakar was able to secure a commitment from the Research Committee to be a partner in the endeavor. Dr. Swarnakar's next move was to apply United States India Educational Foundation's Fulbright Specialist Program, which provides a host institution in India a US scholar for up to 6 weeks to provide support for specific projects, curriculum development, or other activities. Following a successful proposal, eligible Fulbright specialists were invited to apply for a position that, among other duties, would require the successful candidate to help organize and lead national workshop on environment, technology, and society. Dr. Zavestoski was selected as a Fulbright specialist and began conversations with Dr. Swarnakar in July 2013. Once the timing of the 6-week visit was sorted out and a tentative conference date set, Dr. Swarnakar and Dr. Zavestoski, through a series of conference calls and file exchanges, came up with a conference note by the end of September. Dr. Swarnakar began mobilizing resources, not the least of which came from Professor H.T. Deshmukh, IIITM's director, who enthusiastically encouraged Dr. Swarnakar's efforts. Soon, Dr. Swarnakar had secured the support of the Institute for Social and Economic Change, ISEC, in Bangalore, and Dr. Zavestoski received a commitment from the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of San Francisco. Along with RC24, IIITM Gwalior, ISEC, and USF, Dr. Swarnakar completed the conference organizing and sponsorship partnership with Sage Publication. The organizing team fleshed out the conference description, settling on the title Environment, Technology, Sustainable Development, Promises and Challenges in the 21st Century, and began promoting the event. Slowly, the conference was growing beyond what was initially envisioned as a workshop of 30 to 40 scholars, recruited through personal networks. This slow growth exploded when nearly 400 abstracts were received by the deadline. With outstanding support from information technology students at IIITM, back-end data management systems were created to begin sorting through the landslide of interest in the conference. Meanwhile, keynote speakers were secured and Little Workshop was turning into the international conference where the research and the ideas that follow were presented. We are proud that the conference has a slightly different aim and atmosphere than many international research conferences. Not only is Gwalior a somewhat unlikely place for such a conference, so is IIITM. It is, after all, an institute focused on technology and management. But Director Deshmukh encouraged Dr. Swarnakar to put IIITM on the map by doing things a little differently. As a result, the conference had a richly diverse representation of individuals, organizations, and ideas. More than half the participants were women. Participants from within India represented 12 different states, from India's southern tip to as far as Himachal Pradesh, and from the northeast to the westernmost state of Gujarat. Internationally, more than 10 different countries were represented. Paper submissions covered evenly most of the themes in the call for papers: 17 papers on climate change, 31 papers on governance, 17 papers on science and technology, 16 on urban sustainability, and 15 on water. Even the largest theme, governance, breaks down evenly on the conference cross-cutting topical themes: energy, ecosystems, ICT, agriculture and economy, and land use, and its cross-cutting conceptual themes: culture, knowledge and difference, inequality and justice, communities and partnership, and adaptation and resilience. And our blind review process produced not only gender equality, but also seniority equity, with senior academics balanced by a healthy number of students. The conference would not have been possible without the support of a large number of faculty and students at IIITM and ISEC. The involvement of Dr. Zavestoski and the support from his home institution, USF, nor the sponsorships of ICSSR, SAGE, and RC24. But most of all, the conference would not have been possible without the vision of Dr. Swarnakar and his tireless quest as he thought through every last detail required to deliver a world-class conference. We also thank the participants for their initial interest in the conference, for producing the high quality of work you're about to read. Now, I would like to request Dr. Swarnakar, sir, to please present the bouquets to the listed guests. The Director of ISEC, Bangalore, Mr. Pattnaik.
Yep.
Professor Kirit Shantilal Parikh. Professor Richard York. And Professor Raju. having our faculty. Now I would like to call upon Dr. Steven Zavestoski, Associate Professor of Sociology, Environmental Studies, Sustainability Director, College of Arts and Sciences in University.
Frank came up with some time to be able to do a lot of the organizing. The other thing that I did, I'll share briefly, that's organizing our panels. And I wanted to also read to you, we received a letter, since we don't have a representative here from the International Sociological Association Research Committee on Environment and Society. A past president of the association shared a letter with us to read to you today. His name's Riley Dunlap. He's an important person in the field of environmental sociology, and 3 of us here actually have connections with him, either having studied with him or currently working with him. He says, "Dear conference participants, I wish that I could be delivering these comments in person as Pradip Swarnakar and I began discussing plans for this conference over 2 years ago. This is an exciting time for environmental sociology and environmental social sciences more generally. The rapid growth and availability of good data on biophysical conditions, ranging from local toxics to global greenhouse gas emissions, combined with analytical techniques such as multi-level modeling and GIS, is providing unprecedented opportunities for conducting cutting-edge empirical analyses. It's clear that we need more input from scholars and nations such as India, and I would add the other countries we have represented here, if we are to develop an environmental sociology and environmental social science that is relevant to the Southern Hemisphere. Your perspectives are essential for developing a truly global environmental field of study. And I'm therefore excited to see the very large and interesting set of papers on the program. I wish you all a very interesting and rewarding experience at the conference, and sincerely hope that I will meet some of you on a future visit to India." So let's move on to the aims of the conference, what we're hoping to accomplish, and then quickly just the program and how to navigate. One of the things I'm excited about is that I've been to international conferences before, and typically those are conferences that are organized by North Americans or Europeans, and we call them international conferences because a few scholars from Asia or Africa or Latin America are invited. We've completely flipped the script here, so to speak. I'm very excited to be in the absolute minority as a North American. And I think that this is going to allow for voices to be heard that I wouldn't normally hear at many of the conferences that I attend. And my hope is that this will help us to break down barriers to research and knowledge exchange by giving some of these voices a platform. That we can also explore the synergies that might exist across disciplines, fields, and locations. As Professor Swarnakar pointed out, we have great geographical diversity represented both within India and beyond. And to build relationships to advance, apply, and disseminate research and knowledge to stimulate sustainability innovation. So many of you have already seen our color scheme here for our main themes, cross-cutting topical themes, and the cross-cutting conceptual themes. And the hope was that you might have a particular topical area of interest, but not have considered looking at it from the perspective of, for example, inequality and justice, or adaptation and resilience. Or you might focus in the area of agriculture and not thought so much about governance and more about science and technology. This will give you the ability to see how some of those different perspectives and different angles for approaching a topic are being approached by other people. We'll have moderators at each panel that will introduce the panel speakers, keep time, and facilitate questions and answers. And we have students from here at IIITM who will be serving as rapporteurs, and we hope to post to the website later their summaries so that you can see what you might have missed in a panel you weren't able to attend. And how it actually works, I hope you don't mind. I've used two examples, 2 papers, Downscaling Climate Change, Perceptions and Adaptive Behaviors of Rural Farmers in West Bengal, India. And as you can see, its main theme is coded for climate change. It has these sub-themes of agriculture, and in this case, adaptation and resilience. I'm sorry, that one has the sub-themes of agriculture and, oh yeah, that's correct, adaptation and resilience, so the arrows. And then on the bottom, I've given you the example of the paper, Community Participation to Community Empowerment, a model for community-based ecotourism in Goa. So it's a paper primarily about governance, but focusing as well on economy and land use and looking at communities and partnerships and inequality and justice. So conference outcomes. Obviously, many of you have read on the website. We aim to have some publications, possibly in journals and an edited volume with Sage. But we're also hoping that this might result in a network for interdisciplinary environment, technology, and sustainability research. And we hope that you'll have conversations with each other over the course of the next 3 days that explore this idea. What would benefit you? How would you be able to do better research if you had a network that you could turn to? That might be a knowledge sharing network, simply a web-based forum for communication. It might be something that is an annual or biennial meeting or conference like we're having here today. Should that sort of a network or informal organization have a regional or global focus? I mean, these are the kinds of questions that we hope you have some feedback to give us, and we'll post a feedback form on the website, both for your general feedback on the conference so that we know what we did well and didn't do so well, but we hope as well you'll have some feedback on this idea of how to follow on this conference so that we don't lose the momentum that we might gather here over the next 3 days with the wonderful research that's being presented. Thank you.
That whole framework of the session. And now I would like for our respected director, sir, Professor Deshmukh, to please come up to the stage and inspire us with a couple of words.
Professor Kirit, Parikh, Professor Gaurav, Professor Pattnaik, Professor Raju, Professor Stephen, Dr. Pradip, my dear delegates from abroad, dear participants and students, a very good morning to all of you, and I warmly welcome you to our institute, ABV-IIITM. We are hosting this conference. This conference is hosted in a peculiar city of Gwalior. Gwalior has a rich heritage. It's rich in music, rich in history. And Gwalior is located in Madhya Pradesh. Madhya Pradesh is the forest capital of India. Madhya Pradesh is full of biodiversity, and still the forests are intact. On that background, we are really proud to host this particular international conference. And there are many reasons for hosting this. These reasons are professional, reasons are institutional, and there are some personal reasons. Professional reasons, because this will provide a good forum, good platform to exchange views, to see the state of the art, to see what has been done in this particular area. And it is very interesting. The title of the conference is Environment, Technology and Sustainable Development. Technology is embedded within environment and sustainable development. Even though we are a technology institute, the concerns for society, concerns for green environment are very much visible. So the professional reason was, why not we make a platform and try to understand, try to also portray what we have been doing in this particular area. The second motivation from institutional point of view was to network with ISEC, another institute which is concerned about economics and social change, and College of Arts and Science from University of San Francisco. So there are diverse disciplines: arts, science, information technology, economics, and sociology. So we believe that a sociologist perspective is going to be different. A sociologist, this is my perception after interacting with Dr. Pradip, sociologist looks at the world differently. He has a different reason. He looks at social dynamics, he looks at communities, he looks at roles of communities, he looks at governance structure and how the issues of sustainability are to be addressed. So the second motivation was from networking point of view, try to connect like-minded people and institute who can work in this particular area. Third motivation was selfish, that we are an IT institute. We are spread over 160 acres, and just we came out with a rough estimate. We are generating about 2,500 tons of CO2 per year. Now this is a big figure. This is the carbon footprint we are generating. So we thought at least we'll also learn something from this conference and try to reduce our carbon footprint. Try to sensitize the community in and around, and in general, the future managers about how to tackle the sustainability issue. And lastly, the personal motivation was to call attention of Professor Kirit Parikh. Kirit Parikh is a tall figure. Even at this age, he is very active. He edits India development reports, which has become a landmark by itself. He being in the planning commission, he has given a new thrust. And I thought that this will be also a good opportunity to attract his attention and also to know what are the policy issues in this particular area. So from this point of view, we are trying to host this conference. And I remember, I think it is quoted by Mahatma Gandhi. Somewhere he has said that the difference between what we do and what we are capable of doing would suffice to solve most of the world's problem. So when he mentioned world's most of the problem, I think he must have had sustainability in his frame of reference. So this conference is also a forum. What we are capable of doing, what has been done at the other institute, and in general try to understand the state of the art in this particular area. As we have had frequent meetings with Professor Stephen and Pradip, and my favorite take is sustainability is also managing diversity, whether it is biodiversity, it is gender diversity, different governance structure, and so on. So sustainability requires a very, very big canvas which cannot be left to technologists or scientists alone. And I think that is where the sociologist perspective is needed. And I think with this background, we are very much looking forward to the deliberations and proceedings of this conference. I wish you a very, very intellectually sustainable stay on the campus in the august company of peacocks, snakes, butterflies, and so many birds on the campus. Wish you all the best.
Such motivational words. Before I invite the Director of the Institute of Social and Economic Change of Bangalore, Professor Binay Pattnaik, to come up on stage and enlighten us with a few words, I would like to give a brief background. Professor Pattnaik is a PhD in sociology from Pune University, and before becoming the Director of IISAC Bangalore, he had worked as a professor in IIT Kanpur and IIT Bangalore, and now he specializes in the area of sociology of science and technology, environment, sociology, and social movement. Sir, please come up on the stage and share a few words with us.
Good morning, everybody. Professor Parikh, Professor Deshmukh, Stephen, Pradip, and colleagues from different parts of the world and different parts of India, students. As you know, we are a co-host, and I being also a social scientist having deep interest, research interest in sociology of science, technology, and environment. It was always very inspiring, and I felt at home when Pradip Swarnakar came to me saying that this is the theme we would like to host a conference. And that was not the first point, rather I was also at Buenos Aires, and there also he had consulted me. So I said, why don't you make a proposal to your RC? And when it was approved in the evening, he came running to me, sir, it has been approved. I said, very nice, then we will do it at your institute and first take the consent of your director. So everything fell in line. So after 1 year, we are here to realize our academic aspirations. Now, a lot of things, all background material have already been told by Pradip as well as Stephen. So I would like to say something which is going to provide an intellectual background to this theme, that is environment, technology, and sustainable. I'll be very brief. And I see the themes that you have, they don't cover the philosophical and the historical aspect. Okay, so I'll be very brief, and I hope I will fill in the gap by talking a little about the historical background and the philosophical background of this issue that we are here, which is of course global issue, is not typical to India, it's a global issue. So colleagues, as you know, environment, technology, and sustainable development. This has been very close to my heart for 2 decades or so. I did write something on this. So in a brief, I would like to share, rather try to provide historical and intellectual or philosophical background to this conference. Start with mercantile capitalism, and I'll try to be as interdisciplinary as possible, not merely sociological, but philosophy, economics, sociology, and environmental sustainable areas. As much as possible, I'll try to be interdisciplinary. So start with mercantile capitalism. So this is a background to the current environmental crisis. That's how I perceive, because the plundering of the colonies began during the colonial period. Okay, because 2 important discoveries pointed out by Bertrand Russell was that the discovery of the gunpowder and the discovery of mariner's compass. These 2 key discoveries made mercantile capitalism possible, and these 2 key discoveries changed the history of the world. So one is the discovery of the gunpowder and discovery of mariner's compass. So India was discovered, Australia was discovered, and other parts of the world was discovered to the colonial powers. So colonization began, and colonization, of course, took place for exploitation of natural resources, and that is the trigger point of the ecological problem or environmental problem, because timber needs were very high in UK. I will refer to the writings of R.K. Merton, that how the shipbuilding, synonymous with mercantile capitalism, developed a tremendous need for timber in UK. And soon, because of the growing need of mercantile capitalism, England experienced depletion of wood forests, and they started looking elsewhere. And therefore, India, overseas South Asian, British colonies provided the good source for collecting timber, and which supported the shipbuilding industry. And it's not only England, but there were competitors, because mercantile capitalism was highly competitive. So apart from England, there were Dutch, the French, the Spanish, the Portuguese. So if East India Company and the Britishers decolonized Asia, we said India, Sri Lanka, this part of the world. And then you will see the, of course, Spanish and Portuguese certain segments, but it was vast part of the Latin America was colonized by the Spanish and the Portuguese. And whatever the British did to us, and Spanish and Portuguese did the same to Latin America. So exploitation of natural resources gave rise to serious ecological crisis. This is the beginning, that's how I looked at it. So logging began in a very big way, and deforestation took place. And not only that, there was also colonial need for steam engine. How the ship should run in this. They need coal. So mining. So mining in the pristine areas of Southeast Asia or other parts of the world. So this is the little background that I give. If that was the mercantile capitalism which triggered the environmental issues or ecological crisis of the world, then come to development of port cities. That's the second stage of mercantile capitalism. Development of port cities like Calcutta, Madras, Bombay, and then the industrial cities. They are famous for the rise of infamous slums of Indian cities because of commercial activities stimulated by the mercantile capitalism. Migration started taking place, and these port cities grew. Second is the industrial capitalism, next stage of capitalism. So the arrival of multinational corporations and heavy industrializations. This is the second phase of capitalism. So where we, again, if you look at from a neo-Marxist viewpoint, the less developed countries and the developed countries, the central-peripheral relationship. If we try to understand this relationship, central-peripheral relationship, then the issues become very clear. Because on this framework, if you look at, you say, these so-called earlier colonies then become independent and try to acquire economic growth or experience industrialization. Then how do they do? That's through acquisition of capital, but they didn't have enough capital at their disposal. So capital lies in the West. That's with the multinationals. And to industrialize, they needed technology, which is again patented, and it lies in the West. So the multinationals came with the baggage, but India, it's not only multinational, but there are several kinds of collaborations. Only technical collaboration, technological, as financial collaborations, and some are technological, financial, and managerial collaborations of different kind. So multinationals landed and started plundering in the 1950s and 60s. You know the Latin American debt trap and the collapse of economies there. Inflation went to the extent of 300% in some countries. So these are already recorded. I don't have to tell them you. But here I would like to point out that the technologies this MNCs brought were certainly not energy efficient technologies. These are obsolete technologies. This was the order of the world that the multinationals never gave the best technologies to the developing countries. After flogging a technology in the developed countries, they used to, through the licensing policies, they used to transfer the obsolete technologies to India or similar third world countries, or today's language, what you call it, developing countries. So we also wanted heavy industrialization, and medium-scale industries also started. Heavy industries as well as medium-scale industries started booming, and industrialization took place in India. So we experienced transfer of inappropriate technologies. Transfer of inappropriate technologies, and which have been highly environmentally polluting. Therefore, the environmental crisis in urban India. So these technologies have been, environmentally hazardous. So if I continue to talk in the same line of central-peripheral relations, the relationship between the developed countries and the developing countries, I would refer to the Technological Dependency by Francis Stewart, published in 1977, very well-known thesis, Technological Dependency, the thesis which says that technological dependency is part of the larger dependency perspective, which says that dependency is perpetuated through technology, through transfer of technologies. And how? That is through unequal terms of trade, through monopoly pricing, to heavily lopsided terms of technology transfer. Heavily lopsided terms of technology transfer. The developing countries were the receiving end. And therefore some people like in India, intellectuals become conscious, so they started playing with how to restrict these unrestricted flow of technologies which are obsolete, and the other exploitative mechanisms, what you call hidden terms of the MOUs. So India developed monopoly restrictive trade practices, etc. Nevertheless, the question here remains, the central issue that I am trying to refer to you, the heavily lopsided terms of technology transfer. And through that, inappropriate technologies were transferred and obsolete technologies were transferred. And therefore, you have an environmental crisis, have a high level of pollution, water pollution, air pollution, etc., etc. Having talked about the industrial sector, now also, we have been also trying to agriculturally self-sufficient. So, in late 1960s is the period where India experienced self-sufficiency in agriculture. But that is through commercialization of agriculture. So, capital investment were allowed, the land grant movement in the US and how through Ford Foundation and other programs, through community development program, etc. gradually, agricultural technologies through the negotiations were transferred to India, and it was said that the capitalist world felt that unless given agricultural technologies, India will not be able to overcome its horrendous poverty, the poverty of 1950s and 60s. So they realized that that could be another reason why, it's because of its poverty, particularly rural poverty, India is thinking or leaning towards the left, that is towards the Soviet Union. So how to restrict India's leniency towards Soviet Union? So the capitalist world decided in favor, let us give them some technology, capitalistic technology, particularly in the agriculture sector, so the high-yielding variety. So they call them miracle seeds. If the productivity in rural India will go up, maybe India will escape starvation, and it will not be joining hands with the leftist world. That is the thesis. So commercialization of agriculture took place. So capital-intensive agriculture came into picture. So high technology, capital input has caused serious water crisis. This is undeniable, a fact. Punjab, Haryana, Rajasthan have experienced the consequences, particularly with regard to water crisis, because of capital-intensive agriculture, or what we call technology-intensive agriculture. And due to overexploitation of groundwater also, places like Gujarat and UP, there is serious depletion of groundwater. So there are cracks, with serious cracks on the surface. And it's also an ecological problem. And overuse of chemical fertilizer has led to salination of the topsoil. So it has influenced productivity adversely. And of course, the impact of pesticides. It influences the microcosm, again, environmental questions. So, loss of micronutrients from soil because of overuse of chemical fertilizers, etc., etc. So having given you a little bit about historical perspective on capitalism, that is on industrial capitalism, now let us come more towards what, if you sociologically will call post-industrial society. Instead of saying post-industrial, that may be slightly controversial, I will say a little more contemporary societies. So heavy industry and large developmental projects like nuclear power projects, thermal power projects, multi-purpose river valley projects, mining-based metallurgical industries, etc., have given rise to a new phenomenon called development-induced displacement. Development-induced displacement. It is now a serious question. It's now a serious question. The burning issue of Vedanta, a multinational, which has been asked to shut down its plant in the interiors of Kalahandi, Orissa. And you know the serious issue of POSCO. Again, it's considered to be the largest ever foreign direct investment that has come to India. So 5 years ago, it was considered worth 52,000 crores. And in today's value, it will be much more. So, again, environmental issues and popular protests emerging. Popular protests have taken a serious turn. You know, it is threatening governments. Supreme Court has been interfering. Political issues, developmental issues have become political issues because it is concerning livelihood of large number of people who are going to be displaced. Displacement caused by developmental problems and serious environmental crisis, because if you say Vedanta, the Niyamgiri Hills, the range of mountains is going to disappear. It's not only tribal livelihood, but 2 rivers that are flowing from these mountains are also going to dry up if Vedanta is allowed to mine in the Niyamgiri Hills. So is the case of POSCO. So that I can give you a large number of examples, but the point is that it's a new phenomenon, development-induced displacement. So whenever our ministry does, or economists do, environmental impact assessment, displacement is considered to be perfect today. Environmental impact assessment is not only taking into consideration the ecological aspect, but the livelihood aspects also. So today is not merely environmental impact assessment, but social and environmental economic assessment, ACIA, that's how it's called. So in contemporary context, there are much more serious issues coming up. Time doesn't allow me, but I'll just spell them out. He said the threats of e-waste. How to handle e-waste. Then nuclear waste. Urban waste management. So time doesn't allow me, but I just raised the issues. These are also technological issues which are related to environment. But having spelled out these historical background, I'll come to a little bit of philosophical aspect of it. The epistemological problem. So the relationship between science, technology, and environment is not only a developmental issue, but it is also an epistemological issue. Environmental researchers have done this research. I will refer you to the work of Carolyn Merchant from the University of California. Okay, The Death of Nature. It's a profound book. So, for the first time, Carolyn Merchant pointed out the anti-ecological foundation of modern science and technology. And having followed Carolyn Merchant, the Indian scholars like Vandana Shiva, Ashish Nandi, they wrote also extensively on this. So, but, okay, to touch up a little bit of philosophical issues, were like the epistemological issue. See, modern science began with Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon, who said that science is for application, not knowledge for knowledge's sake, but laboratory for experimentation. So, considered to be father of modern science or father of modern laboratory science, which has implications for technology. Francis Bacon said that scientific method is not only for knowledge generation, but scientific method is for application, but application to the nature, so that, mind this, he says that nature is to be controlled. Nature is to be subdued. For what? To meet human interests. So, the human-centric world began with this. The interest of human is supreme. So, nature is subservient. If not subservient, should be reduced to be subservient through the technological means. By the application of scientific and technological means, nature should be rendered subservient, rather nature should be conquered. So these are the philosophical issues that have been pointed out that led to, subservient or interference in the natural processes. Nature has to be rendered subservient to human interest. Nature should be a slave to contribute to the, luxury or affluence of human beings, to save from cold, to save from flood, to things of this kind. So they underline, the ecological scientists undermine, look, here it is said that nature is to be subdued, nature is to be controlled. No, having a multi-purpose river valley dam is nothing but controlling the flow of a nature. You are using for irrigation purpose, that is serving human interest. Maybe you generating electricity, again to run your ACs. To serve human interest. So, but an ecological scientist say that nature has to be respected. So they find the problem here that this is an anti-ecological foundation of modern science and technology. Followed by Francis Bacon, came Descartes, René Descartes. The mechanistic principle, the mechanistic mind and matter separate. The mechanistic principle or the mechanistic philosophy. It sounded the death knell of naturalistic philosophy. To him, the material universe is nothing but a machine. So reality is made up of atomistic parts, consists of discrete information about reality. Reality is assumed to be operating according to the laws or the rules of machine, not that of nature. Based on the components of reality are context-free, they are discrete. So if you say they are discrete, context-free, they are subject to manipulation. Facts can be taken from their context and used in another context. It is so defined to make nature more manipulable, so that human interest is protected. You can manipulate with natural processes without taking a holistic view. Okay? So nature is not studied as a whole, but as atomistic components or with certain components which are not necessarily well connected, could be discrete as well. And this makes modern science a reductionist science, says Vandana Shiva, because it reduces the creative potentiality of the nature to a manipulable potentiality. It assumes that all the systems have basic constituents that are atomistic and discrete. All the natural processes are mechanical. And this reductionist science and technology is nothing but atomistic. It is not holistic. So the failure of modern science to understand nature as a whole is considered to be one of the principal causes of, or this is an epistemological issue, serious causes of environmental crisis that we face today, or ecological crisis we face today. Because modern science or modern technology do not allow us, with the paradigm-based knowledge, it doesn't allow us to understand nature holistically. We study or we understand nature segmentally, whether physical or chemical or biological. We have paradigm-based sciences. Study nature segmentally. So studying nature segmentally means we forget that nature as a whole, it is a living system. We forget that nature is a living system. So it is an epistemological issue which is causing environmental crisis. This is the reason. And from this began ecofeminism, championed by Vandana Shiva, where it is said that science and technology is a male enterprise and nature, feminine enterprise, endowed with feminine principles of regeneration and procreation. One can debate still on that. But so science and technology compared with masculine principles and nature with feminine principles. So as masculinity principle or masculinity exploits femininity, so feminine bodies is exploited by masculinity, so nature is exploited by science and technology. Therefore, industrialization is nothing but, heavy industry-based industrialization is nothing but a violence against nature. It's a violence against nature, and therefore she calls it epistemological violence. Epistemological violence. Little bit having talked about this. Now, I would say that what's the solution? Problem is there. Again, I would suggest more theoretical solutions in this regard. I am more, in favor of softer technologies. The principle of Gandhi is very well known to all of you. the khadi and the charkha technology for the village-based economies of Mahatma, and which was in fact expanded by J.C. Kumar in terms of appropriate technology, and followed E.F. Swarnakar visited India, established the Gandhian Institute of Studies. So after going back from India, he wrote this famous book, Small is Beautiful, and argued for intermediate technologies. That developing societies, or so-called less developed societies, should opt for intermediate technologies, or small technology. Therefore, the famous Bouquets, called Small is Beautiful. And followed by that, Ivan Illich says, tools of conveyor tools. But whether Gandhi, Swarnakar, and Ivan Illich, I say that these are beginning points. These technologies do not match today's requirements. They're very rudimentary. Maybe environment friendly, but very rudimentary. I will go a little ahead. Still better formulations on this line. Say Macrobi's famous articulation on non-violent technologies. Clark's soft technologies. It's a soft technology, it resembles today's IT technologies, nanotechnologies, etc. So soft technologies, Lovin's soft technology, which is very energy efficient, based on renewable energies. Harper's alternative technologies, radical technologies. So here, Harper says alternative technology, alternative to the West. That is counterculture of Western industrial technologies, connected to alternative lifestyle movement. Because Western mode of development is based on Western style of consumption. Therefore, if you change Western style of consumption, then the mode of development will change, then you can introduce a different kind of technology. That's the argument. So we can think about some kind of alternative technology to have a sustainable development, and which should be, these could be some of the parameters. One, this should be small scale. I'll give you a live example. These large scale displacement that took place in Pattnaik, Narmada Bachao Andolan, she, for the first time, brought out this issue of displacement. Why large scale displacement took place? Because the project itself is very large. High technology and large projects. So wherever there are large projects, there is large scale displacement. So why not have smaller projects? Smaller projects will also maybe will minimize displacement, and the environmental or ecological degradation that is going to cause in the vicinity is also going to be less. So smallness is also a point to be considered. And this should be simpler to operate, relatively simpler, based on local resources. Technology that are based on local, factor in domain, economists are very familiar with this, and it should not be capital intensive. I don't say that they should be labor intensive, but at least they should not be capital intensive. They should be affordable by the developing societies. They should be energy efficient and also should be eco-friendly. Should be eco-friendly. So given these parameters, if we work, maybe we can move closer towards attaining a sustainable development. And I will not take much time. There are quite a few examples of this kind of technology which are upcoming actually. I'll give you a small example of Honeybee Network. You might have heard about Honeybee Network. It is run by Professor Anil Kumar Gupta at IIM Ahmedabad. It is a network. It's a network of 3 organizations. One is NIF, National Innovation Foundation. Second is GIAN, that is called Grassroots Innovation Augmentation Network. And the third one is SISTI, short form, and in full form it means Society for Research and Initiative for Sustainable Technologies. So Honeybee Network is a combination, or rather network of 3 organizations, where the NIF, that's the main organization, it collects, NIF has collected more than 1 lakh innovations which are grassroots level innovations. Not that all the innovations lead to technologies, some of them have laid. So these are technologies, grassroots level technologies. Means These are technologies which are culturally embedded, socially embedded, developed by not multinationals but ordinary people. These are based on traditional knowledge systems, sometimes by common people, even sometimes knowledge that are based on folk traditions. So that gives us some kind of technology which are socially and culturally embedded. These are not imported technologies. And as long as there is a participation in nature, this is going to be sustainable. This is what it is argued. So NIF registers innovations from the people. It helps them in developing them into business propositions. And same, within the same organization, GYAN, what it does, it helps the innovator to standardize, to give the input of modern science and technology so that it is standardized. And an intellectual property right can be acquired by a village innovator to this technology. It gives support. And SISTI, a Society for Research and Innovative for Sustainable Technology, it does documentation, dissemination of grassroots innovation, and it also some kind of what you call venture capital, a little bit of financing to the grassroots innovation so that he goes towards commercialization. A little bit of venture capital financial support so that he goes towards commercialization of the technology. So if we, I don't say that these kinds of technologies are going to replace the modern technologies of the industrial world. No, they cannot. But we can try out, and they can be slowly rising. And particularly forget about industrial technologies, but rural technology, rural requirements, service sector requirements, they can be fed through these sustainable technologies. They can be even certain parts of the manufacturing technology can be dealt with these technologies. Some more examples can be given. You say Ministry of Science and Technology, it has a cell on society, science and society division, and it has been nourishing or funding for last 2 decades technologies at rural level. Technologies at rural level, which are based on grassroots level organization, voluntary associations. So what the difference here is that these are technologies which are socially embedded. Technologies which are socially embedded and culturally embedded. So they are connecting to their suppliers, culturally connected, locally connected. They connect also socially to the market. And through their support system, Ministry of Science and Technology, for more than 2 decades, has developed 25 such groups. Or these groups are groups which are developing rural technologies, encouraging rural entrepreneurs, giving them patent rights. The point of distinction of this program is that it recognizes the process of technical innovations not only circumscribed by the devices or the processes of technology concerned, but also involve socio-economic relations, to say procurement of raw materials, and to say in the organization of production, and to say in their marketing. So social relations have been taken care of. And local resources are also taken care of. So this recognition of the way in which technology is embedded in the local economy, social and trade relations, etc., make this a different kind of technology. And I have a feeling that these kinds of technologies would be more sustainable and environment friendly. So, other little bit of solutions that I would suggest for heavy industry or industrial technologies is the regulation of technologies. How to regulate? There has to be a commission, Technology Regulation Commission, which it is not there to regulate the import of technology, but after the technology arrives in India, while functioning, how environment friendly or how environmental just it is. So regulation from that view, not in terms of participation or what you call equity participation, etc. No, or what are the terms and conditions? Regulation from the viewpoint of environment. how energy efficient it is or how environment friendly it is. So some regulatory commission, if instituted, it will take care of a lot of emissions issues or environmental degradation that is caused by heavy industries. And other issues that make development more participatory. These large developmental projects where large protests are taking place, if the local people are made stakeholders, so they will cater to their local needs and they will take care of the local relations, culturally embedded nature of the technology will be proved there, and also they know their ecosystem, they know their surrounding. So how well the technology matches the surrounding or the ecosystem, that can be also well responded or fed by the people. So a participatory nature of the development would make a technological development more environment friendly and sustainability. And develop sustainable technologies by extending support through policymakers. So I stop here and thank you very much for giving me a presentation.
Thank you, sir, for giving a historical, geographical, and philosophical flavor to the conference. And moving on, continuing with the inaugural session, Padma Bhushan Shri Kirit Shantilal Parikh, our esteemed chief guest for this conference, is a very experienced member of academia. He has been a professor of economics for many illustrious years. After graduating with a Doctor of Science in Civil Engineering and a master's degree in economics from MIT, USA, he has served as a chairman of the Integrated Energy Policy Committee, Planning Commission, member of the Economic Advisory Council of Prime Ministers of India, and had also been a member of the National Committee for Environmental Planning and Coordination, as well as the National Committee on Science and Technology and Fuel Policy Committee. Dr. Parikh has added to his many achievements by being the editor of India Development Report, which provides a non-governmental assessment of India's development and policy options, and authoring, co-authoring, and editing 29 books covering vast topics such as planning, engineering, water resource management, appropriate technology for housing, optimum requirement for fertilizers, energy systems and policy, national and international food policies, trade policies, and so many more. It is with great pleasure that I now ask Dr. Parikh to take the podium and share some words with us.
Professor Deshmukh and friends, I will be brief. I think the question is of we want sustainable development, but one should ask, do we really want sustainable development? What do we mean by sustainable development? I mean, if somebody asks you how's your marriage and if you say it's sustainable, it doesn't sound too exciting. So what we want really is growth. We want something to improve the well-being of the people in this country, and that also requires that we take care of their environmental and natural surrounding, so that they grow that the life is better in many ways, in a more holistic sense. Now, I think we do need growth, but how do we fulfill these requirements? I think we really need to develop economically, and that requires perhaps the use of modern technology as well. However, we can do these things in a way that minimizes the environmental degradation and natural degradation. There is no way we can avoid some change in the ecological balance of the world, because every time a child is born, the per capita availability of resources changes, because there is really no way that you will have a system which is static. The number of people are the same, there is nothing, and that would be really very sustainable, but I think very boring. So we need a system in which there is development, there is growth, there is excitement, people's aspirations get fulfilled, they have opportunities to do things that others in the past have not done. And I think, but of course I think we have not been growing or developing in a way that preserves the quality of the environment that we would all like to have. So we need to think in terms about what is the way we can develop our economy, our society in a way that preserves the quality of the environment to some level. I think we also have to recognize that because certain amount of natural resources will deplete, sustainability in the sense of sustainability of the growth, the momentum, can be maintained only if we think in terms of some degree of substitution, that we need to make, say, I'm using more raw material and less man-made capital, more natural capital, less man-made capital. So you can have some degree of substitution between capital and natural resources is possible and required. But capital is not just hard capital. Capital can also be knowledge. Capital can also be the technology that they develop. And that's why I think what we need to think in terms of how do we really bring in technology that is and knowledge that really helps us go towards a more sustainable society. And among these, if you look at it, the most important resource that we have to substitute or we have to minimize use of are the energy resources in the world, particularly the fossil fuel and depletable energy resources. If you look at India's options, what are our energy resources? All of you know that we are very short of oil. Currently, we are importing 75% of the oil that we have, that we consume. And in the process, we will really increase over time. This import dependence may increase if we don't change our structure of energy consumption and what kind of resources we get energy from. Gas also we are very limited. We are importing maybe 30% of the gas at the moment, but we will also start importing more of it. And surprise of all surprises, we have lots of coal resources in the country, but still we are importing 25% of the coal today. So yet coal is not so large that we have. In fact, the available known reserves of coal, out of which the extractable coal reserves of the country, we will run out in maybe 40-45 years if we keep growing use of coal at about 5% per year as we have been doing for the last 30 years. So we have to think in terms of these conventional resources. We don't have much. We need to think in terms of new resources. Now if you say, suppose we look at the renewable resources, what do we have? We can look at biogas, everybody talks about it, but if you put all the dung of animals generated and dung produced by the animals in the country, in cattle in the country, and you put in a biogas plant, then the amount of biogas you will get maybe the most 15 million tons of oil equivalent at the most. Now, what is our total energy consumption? It's about 15 million tons, 600 million tons of oil equivalent today. And in the maybe 20-30 years, by 2030, we will be needing anywhere between 13 to 1500 million tons of oil equivalent. So all the animal dung, it will be very difficult to put all the dung in biogas plants. So yes, it can help, it can make some small contribution, but it is a limited option. So we should keep a sense of perspective in mind. I can tell you, in 1962, I wrote a thesis at MIT on benefit cost analysis of biogas plants. I was also excited about this idea of every family having a biogas plant where you put your animals' dung, get gas, and the slurry that comes out is as good as a fertilizer as a dung that you apply to your field as an organic fertilizer. So the idea was that you can have your cake and heat it too. But nonetheless, it was very exciting. But over the many years, it has really made this very small difference to the energy situation in the country. And if you also realize that people who have 3 or 4 cattle, 5 cattle needed to run a biogas plant do not really, are few, not all, maybe only half the animals, cattle in the country, owners of cattle can put some biogas plants. And those plants then they have to, and those are the people somewhat relatively better off. And when they become a little, when they have an option of getting natural gas, LPG or kerosene, they would stop using biogas, because who wants to shove that shit every day and take out and worry about the disposal of the slurry right next to your house, which creates a problem of mosquitoes and so on. So it is something that one has to recognize, that in the kind of lifestyle that people want and the options that they have, and then decide on your technology. So it's a limited option biomass. Then we had this magic solution that was being offered some 10 years ago called biodiesel. Everyone is going to grow jatropha, which is from wasteland, and this jatropha is going to produce biodiesel, and this will work out. But unfortunately, the yields of jatropha have not been as promised as was expected. The plant is not as hardy. If you have too much of rain or frost or something, the whole plantations get disappeared, and it does require water and so on. So growing jatropha really competes with growing other agricultural products. And this country is very limited in terms of the amount of cultivable land that we have. For the last 30 years, the net cultivable area in the country has remained at more or less 140 million hectares. And so this is really, it's not growing because we are growing in population, there is a lot of pressure on land, and we don't really have adequate land to spare for growing fuel. And in any case, it did not work out as it was promised. So I think magic solutions often do not really work out, and one has to recognize, one has to understand the sociological context within which and economic context within which these solutions have to operate. If you look at then ethanol, Brazil is making lots of ethanol using sugarcane, and it runs its cars on ethanol. In India, again, with the same problem comes, sugarcane is the most water-intensive crop, and we are not really blessed with that much of water, so that water would be much better utilized if it is distributed evenly across some of the other crops in terms of producing total agricultural output. But if you are a farmer, then one could ask, if that is the case, why do people grow sugarcane? But if you are a farmer with a small plot, you can maximize your income by growing sugarcane. And therefore there is an incentive to grow sugarcane at a micro level, but it does create waste of water. But so if you want to if you grow lots of sugarcane, then you have to displace other crops out of it, and that is and we don't have enough water to do that. So ethanol produced from sugarcane is also a very small option that we have. Similarly, hydrological development, dams and other things, it's estimated that India can generate something like 150,000 megawatt worth of set up hydro plants with 150,000 megawatts, which will be operating at something like 35% load factor. Just to put it in perspective, today this country has something like 230,000 megawatt of installed capacity of power generation, out of which some 40,000 megawatts are hydro power plants, and the average load factor is of the order of about 60%, but the hydro plants run at a load factor of 35%. If you think about what will the country need if the economy keeps growing at 8% per year by 2030, you recognize that we'll need something anywhere between 600,000 to 1 million megawatt of energy of power plants, and out of that hydro can provide maybe at the most 150 if we can overcome the problem of ecological challenges faced by development of hydro plant, the displacement that is involved in building large hydro plants, and also the ecological disturbance. even when you make a run-of-the-river plant, and the way a run-of-the-river plant is that if you have there are two types of plants. You store water, that is created usually a big dam and displaces people, a big reservoir and displaces people. But you can have a run-up-the-river plant where you do not really store water. You only have a small weir, you put a tunnel, and put the tunnel down maybe 10-15 kilometers down where the height difference is there, and then you run a power plant there. But if you do that, then the river stretch of the 10-15 kilometers dries up, and there are also ecological disturbances there. So one has to recognize that the designing of or building this, we have to take care of these issues of environment and ecological disturbances. So hydro plant, though we have 150,000 megawatt of potential, we won't be, and perhaps we should not be willing to develop all these plants, all this capacity, and so that's also limited. So we are left with really wind and solar. These are the two major natural renewable resources which have somewhat small environmental footprints which we can use and which certainly we have to rely on because these are our really large sources apart from nuclear. The trouble with nuclear is that yes, it has a huge potential in the country, but it has been very, very slow. And the way our strategy is going is that we are short of uranium also, with which you run your power plants like the one in Rajasthan or Madras or Narora. These power plants are on natural uranium. Till recently we were not allowed to import uranium. Now we can import uranium in uranium plants. But even then, our strategy has been that we develop these first generation nuclear plants, then when a first generation nuclear plant works, it produces, using this uranium, it produces electricity, but some of the uranium that you put in gets transmuted into plutonium. And when you have enough plutonium, then you can run what is called a fast breeder reactor. A fast breeder reactor takes this plutonium, some depleted uranium that comes out of the first generation plant, and then it generates electricity, it produces more plutonium than you put in. So it breeds plutonium. Then after maybe 10 years, you have enough plutonium to start another fast breeder reactor. And so you can breed this way. So in principle, if you use all the uranium that you have in your first generation plant, you can generate only 10,000 megawatt worth of nuclear power over its lifetime of 40-45 years. But if you then recycle all this uranium into plutonium, fast breeder reactors, you can generate or support 500,000 megawatt of nuclear power plants. Only problem is it takes 10 years to double the fast breeder, and that our fast breeder reactor is not yet ready, the first one, and that we will see. So in the next 20-30 years, nuclear can make a very small contribution. So really we are left with solar and wind. And one important resource that we have, one might call, is energy efficiency. Because with energy efficiency, we can really reduce the need for energy itself, and it should be treated as the most important resource that we have. And there are many possibilities exist in improving the energy efficiency in the country, and this will also help us reduce our emissions. Now, of course, the problem is, however, that solar is now very much more expensive than coal-based power plant. For example, it costs maybe 7 to 8 crores of rupees to set up a coal-based power plant, or better still, let's look at the final kilowatt hour price. A solar power today gives you electricity at 7 to 8 rupees per kilowatt hour. A coal-based power plant gives you electricity at 2 rupees per kilowatt hour or 3 rupees per kilowatt hour. And even if you consider that coal-based power plant is to be near the coal mine and solar power can be near the consumer end, it will still be 4 rupees against 7-8 rupees. So they cost more, and initial investment is very high in a solar plant. So if suppose we were to develop for the next 30 years and insist that at least 15% of our electrical capacity or generation comes from solar and wind, then you will find that you will be having to make so much more additional investment upfront for solar and wind that it will not enough investment will be left for putting in other sectors, and the economic growth rate would come down. So there are trade-offs that we have to worry about. Should we really reduce the growth rate? Should we go for this now, or should we do something else? If you look at another thing one has to recognize with solar and wind is that they run for maybe 20% of the time in a year, whereas and so power is not available when you want it. It's available when the sun is shining, or it's available when the wind is blowing. And if you think about it, a coal-based power plant in India runs for 80% of the time. So that 100,000 megawatt of wind power plant can give you as much energy, electricity, as maybe 25,000 megawatt worth of coal-based power plant. So you need to think about these issues as well, that how do we really work this out. Now, so what can we do? Well, certainly I think we need to think in terms of technological innovations. And since this is a technology institute, I would certainly want to emphasize that there are many innovations possible in the technology side which can help us. Solar, for example, is something where costs are coming down rapidly, and there is a lot of scope for bringing down the cost further. And it's not as if that we just have to import technology from the West all the time. We should also think in terms of being the technology supplier to the world. We have enough brain power in the country. We need to have an organization and a technological research management skills that we do not have of the kind that is there in, I would say, United States. But nonetheless, it's one thing we really ought to work in terms of bringing down the solar cost. We need to also think in terms of storage technology, because if you are going to rely on solar and wind, which is available only 20% of the time and not when you want it, you need to store electricity. And storing that electricity would require that we need some kind of storage device. Today we store electricity in a battery, but it's very expensive, and that's not the right solution that we should use. So we need to think about storage systems. So that can be batteries, that can be pumped storage and pumped systems, either water or air or whatever it is. There are also some years ago we had advanced the possibility that you can store electricity in a supercritical loop. If you're a supercritical conductor, it has a zero resistance. So if you put electricity in it, the electricity keeps going in the loop itself, and you can then step it as and when you want it. But I don't think anybody is working on these kind of ideas. But certainly it is possible to think in terms of innovative solutions to bring down the cost of solar, cost of wind, and bringing down storage technology. Other possibility for us is that you can take the agricultural raw materials that comes out, the rice straws, the wheat straws, and so on, which are really currently burned or plowed back into the field. But if you can convert this into cellulosic ethanol, you can use this cellulose and convert it into ethanol, then we can perhaps produce 100, 200 million tons of ethanol from that waste without competing with any food or agricultural production. So that's another area which is very critical that we should really work on. And but I would say that in energy efficiency also, we can have many more innovative solutions possible. For example, LED lights. If you take an incandescent bulb, the standard bulb that we had, and replace it with a CFL, compact fluorescent lamp, all of you know that it really, a 60-watt bulb that consumes 60 watt of energy, the same amount of light can be provided by an 11 watt CFL. But if you can replace that CFL with an LED lamp, that will consume even 2 or 3 watts of power. So it is really from 60 watt to 11 watt to 2 or 3 watts is the kind of reduction that you make in your lighting consumption. The question, however, as again comes that an incandescent lamp costs you 15 rupees a bulb, a CFL costs you 110 rupees, and LED costs you today around 250 rupees. But the way LED costs have been coming down, it was 2,400 rupees 7 years ago. It is 240 rupees today, so it is coming down, and one can expect it to come down further. Even at that price, if somebody is going to loan you the money, it will be worth your while to have these lamps, because you would save enough money to repay for this cost in a reasonable amount of time. However, how do we spread these things? So there is a management technology issue involved also. Suppose we want to spread CFL lamps. Most people who are poor in the country they will feel that I don't want to invest 110 rupees, I would rather buy an incandescent bulb of 15 rupees. The way we had initiated a budget lamp yojana, the idea was that the distribution companies would give this lamp, exchange a CFL with an incandescent lamp and charge only 15 rupees for that. So doing that, they will really give people almost a free CFL. And then question comes, how would the distribution companies, electricity distribution companies finance this? They installed on a random number of these CFLs chips, which measured how many hours this bulb is actually running. So they can make an estimate of what is the total amount of electricity saving that has taken place by distributing all the CFLs they have distributed, and then claim carbon credit on the international market. And while the carbon price in the European market was 20 euros per ton of CO2, this was perfectly sensible and made them very happy to spread CFL. But now that price has fallen to 3 euros per ton of CO2, and this scheme is no longer viable. The reason I am pointing it out is that one needs to understand that you may have a good technology, but it needs to be spread. You need to manage it in a way and need to design policies which makes it possible for people to accept it. One can give other examples also of that kind. That just as one stage we are all enthusiastic about biogas plant or Jatropha oil-based biodiesel, there is also currently, I think, a lot of people are talking about distributed generations or small village level, grids. So microgrids and distributed generations. But one has to give some deeper thought to it, and what would happen, a microgrid which runs on, say, solar or wind would need backup system, storage system. The price would be much higher, and providing 1,000 villages with one grid-connected power, the conventional power would cost you much less than 1,000 small microgrids, each with its own backup, each with its own storage system. And I think each requiring a separate manager to run that system. I think this is just a pipe dream, in my opinion, in some sense. One needs to think in terms of what's a workable, management-wise, what is a workable technology-wise solution. Yes, you can have technological innovations where you have lots of solar small plants, all grid connected, but with IT development so that whenever the plant is not working, you can flow electricity from somewhere else where the plants are running, and you can think in terms of a system by which you can, but it will be an integrated grid based on small generators all over the country, feeding all into the grid, but the grid has to work. And if you talk to villagers in India, they also have aspirations. They don't want to be satisfied with a solar lantern. They have aspirations of the same kind. I want to flip a switch and want the light to come on. If you go, the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Non-Conventional Energy is a scheme to give subsidy for setting up renewable power system in villages which are not grid connected and remote villages. But if you go to a village and ask them that we like to set up this plant here and get this subsidy, they will say, no, we are not remote village, we want to be connected to the grid. So all villages want to be connected to the grid because they know the advantages of getting connected to the grid. And so I think one has to recognize the aspirations of the people and tailor our solutions to that way. So I would merely point out that the whole issue here is, yes, we need to have preserve environment, we need to make it such, but we need to grow. We cannot be just, it should be not just sustainable state, but a sustainable rate of growth is what we want. And if you want that sustainable rate of growth, you have to think in terms of renewable resources, of natural resources, and that requires many innovations, requires technology, which requires innovation in management, and IT can really facilitate some of these. Thank you all.
For that informative speech about renewable resources. This is just a short notice for everyone that after the inaugural session ends, you're cordially to head to the cafeteria as lunch will be provided. Nevertheless, continuing on with our illustrious guests for this event, we have amongst us Professor Richard York. He's the Professor of Sociology and Environmental Studies at the University of Oregon, and the 2013 and 14 Friends of Institute for Advanced Study, member of the School of Social Science at the Institute for Advanced Study, and the chair of the Environment and Technologies section of American Sociological Association. His research focuses on the environment, animals, and science. He has published dozens of scholarly articles and 3 books. In recognition of his research, he has twice, in 2004 and 2007, received the Outstanding Publication Award and once in 2011, and the honorable mention for the same award from the ETS and of the ASA, and the Rule of Sociology Best Paper Award in 2011 from the Rural Sociological Society. He has also received the Teaching and Mentorship Award in 2011 from ETS of the ASA and the Thomas F. Herman Faculty Achievement Award for Distinguished Teaching in 2013, and the Faculty Excellence Award from University of Oregon. It is with great pleasure that now I ask Professor York to take the podium and please share some words with us.
And I want to thank the conference organizers for all the work they've done and for kindly inviting me to talk to you today. And I'm very honored to follow such fine talks by the earlier speakers, and I think you'll find a lot of what I have to say echoes themes that they raised, and I think did so very insightfully. Just to give you a framing statement, my larger theme today and what I'm going to talk about is that we need to think about our environmental problems in a lot of ways, not simply as ones based on technological limitations, but also social, cultural, economic, and political limitations. And in particular, technology is obviously very important and very central to addressing environmental problems, but we need to understand how in practice it's used by humans and works in our social systems. My main focus is on fossil fuels, energy use in general, but I think fossil fuel use, as it's well established, is kind of one of the leading sources of environmental problems around the world. Obviously, the big one for the globe is its influence on global climate change, but of course it leads to lots of other problems from air pollution, acid rain, and lots of problems from extraction of fossil fuels like oil spills, destruction of mountains and land from coal mining and so forth. So I think it's quite reasonable to say it's socially desirable, it's environmentally desirable to move away from fossil fuel use. And of course, it's been well explained, there's a lot of challenges to doing that. And I think one obvious statement is societies need some energy at the very least. Even if we reduce how much we need some energy. And if we're going to move away from fossil fuels, we need to have something else. We need to have alternative fuel sources, non-fossil fuel sources. So it's clearly necessary that we develop those types of sources. But the point I want to make to you today is simply developing those types of sources is not sufficient to push out fossil fuels. And in fact, there can often be perverse synergisms where the development of potential alternatives can in fact contribute to rising fossil fuel use. So before I get to some of my more technical statements, I actually want to just give a little historical story going back to the 19th century when we see the emergence of large-scale fossil fuel use. And I actually want to focus, though, on the history of whaling. Whaling has occurred for centuries or millennia in small scale by indigenous peoples in various parts of the world. But in the Middle Ages, you start to get a growth in whaling that kind of expand commercial whaling in Europe that expanded up into the 19th century. And one of the major purposes of whaling was to get whale oil, which was a major fuel source in the world. We often don't think about that now that we talk about biomass, and we're typically talking about vegetation, that for a substantial amount of time up to the 19th century, biomass from animals, a whale, was a major fuel source. In particular, it was used for lighting lamp oil and also the spermaceti from sperm whales for making candles. And there's often then been suggested this thesis that the discovery of petroleum, particularly of drilling petroleum in mass production, in a sense saved the whales. Because if whales were principally hunted to get whale oil for lighting, it would seem quite reasonable to expect when we get an alternative source, we no longer need to hunt whales. And therefore it'll suppress whaling. Now, the brief history I'm going to tell you here of whaling actually suggests quite the opposite. And so just to start off with noting, quite interestingly, and this is I find surprising to me, maybe it'll be surprising to you too. I think of whaling as in some sense very old-fashioned, and I think of it as kind of a 19th century thing. But in fact, most whales that have ever been killed by humans were killed in the 20th century, not before. And more than half the whales that were killed in the 20th century were killed in the 3 decades after World War II. So most actual killing of whales occurred recently and well after the rise of petroleum and other fossil fuels. So I want to kind of explain that, what I find is an odd phenomenon to some degree, because I think that has a lot of lessons here when we think about developing alternatives to try and suppress uses of some types of resources. So just briefly, the history of whaling is kind of elaborate, but there is actually this important turning point around the 1860s, and that's usually where historians trace the emergence of quote-unquote modern whaling. Before modern whaling, so I'll just simply call it traditional whaling, the system of commercial whaling was sail ships followed whales, and then they sent out men rowing boats with hand harpoons to harpoon the whale by hand, have the harpoon tied to the boat, and as the whale swam off pulling the boat, they continue hitting it with hand harpoons until it died, and then they'd pull it back to the sail ship. For this type of whaling, though, only a few types of whales could be caught. First off, fast whales that swam very quickly couldn't be caught, because you had to catch them with sailing rowboats. And they had to float once they were killed. Otherwise, if they sunk, you lost the whale, and possibly if your boat was tied to it, your boat went down with the whale. So most traditional whaling focused on what are called right whales, and in fact, right whales are called right whales because whalers considered them the right whale to kill because they floated and they were slow. However, by the 19th century, right whales have been heavily depleted. And I should note that the most dominant whaler of the 19th century, the whaling nation was the United States. The United States played a very large role in this. Most right whales stocks were commercially depleted and even commercially extinct. And so this is kind of a crisis point for whaling at which you might think, well, it's the mid-century, the whales can catch easily or depleted, and we start to see kerosene come into use for lighting. Kerosene is developed from coal at the time. Starting in the 1850s, you get kerosene on the market. And then in the 1860s and onward, you get petroleum-based products. But kind of ironically, it's right about this point when whale oil is actually declining in need because of the rise of fossil fuels, that you get the development of modern whaling methods that allow for the expansion of whaling. Key modern development methods, then I should note, actually stem very directly from fossil fuels. A central part of modern whaling is instead of using sail ships, they shift to steam ships, and later to diesel-powered ships. So fossil fuel-powered ships can go fast enough to catch whales other than right whales. And the central ones here for modern whaling are a family of whales called the rorquals, which include the blue whale, most famously the biggest animal to ever live, and the fin whale, among other whales, humpbacks, barred and sei whales. But principally blue whales and fin whales are the center of this process. They could not be caught before by traditional methods. So steamships allow catching of them. A lot of these innovations, I should note, are driven by Sven Foyn, a Norwegian, who also then develops what's called the Svoin gun, or the Svoin harpoon cannon. So it's instead of a traditional hand harpoon, it's a cannon mounted on the deck of the ship that it launches a large harpoon with actually a grenade in the head that explodes once it penetrates the whale, so you can kill a large whale. It's attached by a cable to the ship, so you can kill a large whale, and then down that cable they can pump air into the whale so it floats and then they pull it in. So what you get is the shift from traditional whaling, what types of whales are hunted, to this new method where you actually hunt different types of whales. And this actually accelerates more at the beginning of the 20th century with the discovery of the Antarctic whaling grounds, because most whaling had occurred in the northern hemisphere. The southern stocks were not depleted, and there were a lot of whales in the southern oceans. And so you see this kind of whale rush take off at the beginning of the 20th century. It's good, decades after petroleum has come into widespread use. And in fact, as I said, this develops in an interesting time since whale oil prices plummet at the last part of the 19th century. And then it's at the beginning of the 20th century that this takes off again when you've got the modern methods and expansion. Now, how come that happens? Well, I want to note just one point here, which I'll emphasize throughout my talk, is in some sense this is supply driving demand. Right? That we actually have less need for whale oil in the 20th century, but we have a greater capacity to supply it because of modern technologies. And ironically, particularly because of fossil fuels, right? It's developing fossil fuels rather than pushing out others that lets us catch them. But related to this is innovations in ways to use whales. So you get a shift in what whales are used for. And some of this is very explicit. I mean, part of this is occurring with the expansion of science and technology and knowledge of chemistry. And one of the major innovations occurs at the beginning of the 20th century is hydrogenation. So you can convert whale oil to a solid. And so whale oil, starting in the 20th century, one of its main uses is to make margarine. It's kind of an interesting shift. So less used for fuel, more for margarine, and then also it's used as an additive in paints. So particularly paints that prevent rust, so ships become painted with a whale oil-based paint. It's also used for soap, and a side product of soap manufacture is glycerin, which is used in explosives. So with the emergence of World War I, demand for whales expands further. And then you eventually get factory ships in the 1920s, which allow pelagic whaling, meaning whaling on the open seas. And kind of the history here is probably then kind of sad, and it expands extremely rapidly. And as we know, by the post-World War II era, whale stocks around the world become very heavily depleted. And until you get a final whaling ban put into place in the 1980s, which, I would say is a very important part of suppressing whaling, but actually the sad side of that is, for the most part, whale stocks were completely depleted, so there was no commercial whaling that was possible at the time. Now, I tell that sad story just to give some kind of a historical context to show, actually, our intuition can often lead us wrong. It seems to me it makes sense intuitively that petroleum should have saved the whales. And if you'd asked me that in, say, 1870, I would have predicted it, right? I would think that. And in fact, there's this famous cartoon in Harper's, an American magazine, and I think it's from 1880, and it has a party of all these sperm whales, and they're celebrating the discovery of petroleum. Right? And it's how petroleum saves the whales. Okay. Now, but once again, ironically here, it's somewhat the opposite. Okay, now I'm going to come to some of my more abstract work. I give that as a setup, as a kind of a concrete example. I do a lot of statistical research on nations, so econometric modeling, looking at nations over time, what types of things affect energy use, fossil fuel use. And one of the studies I've done is looking at this question of when nations increase their production of non-fossil fuel energy sources, which are principally going to be nuclear power, hydropower, wind, solar to a lesser degree, and there's some other minor players. Do you actually see that pushing fossil fuel out? Which seems intuitive. Once again, that's that simple, straightforward assumption that we need a set amount of energy. If I produce energy that's not fossil fuels, it seems to make sense that all else being equal, I should use less fossil fuels. But that's the kind of modeling I do to actually test that, to see when you add non-fossil energy sources, do they suppress fossil fuel use in proportion to that which you add? Or do they, to some degree, add on top of them? So I won't go into the analytic details, but I got data for a 50-year period from kind of 1960 up to 2009 on most nations of the world, 132 nations. And the interesting pattern that emerges out of that is that the rate of displacement of fossil fuel by non-fossil fuel energy sources is very low. It's there, but it's low. In the electrical sector, if you just look at electricity, adding non-fossil energy sources, and I want to note in this analysis, this is controlling for things like population by focusing on per capita levels, controlling for economic growth, controlling for how the structure of the economy, whether it's manufacturing or not, and controlling for other demographic factors. So the logic really is this trying to say if everything else remains approximately equal, there are main factors that drive energy use, does adding non-fossil energy push up fossil energy? And what I found is it takes about 10 units of non-fossil energy to suppress 1 unit of fossil fuel use in the electric sector. This would be, once again, the broad cross-national average over this 50-year period. That wouldn't necessarily be the case for any particular nation. Nations would be different from each other, but the broad cross-national average is a little more promising if I look at total energy use, including non-electrical sources like fuels used in transportation in cars and so forth. And for that, I still only found about 5 to 1, a best-case scenario. So this is interesting. This is a phenomenon I've actually called the displacement paradox. I would think non-fossil fuel energy sources should displace fossil fuel if I add them. And they do, but it's not 1 for 1. It's much less than 1 for 1. And that's why I call it a paradox, in that it goes against our intuition. Now, so why does this happen? And I think this is a phenomenon to be studied. Well, I think starting off with my story of whale oil, it gives you a sense of, well, actually, it's probably not that unusual, that there's actually all kinds of complicated feedbacks that happen in social systems that can lead to perverse outcomes. I want to be clear, I don't think this is inevitable. That's why I point to this. I don't think that this must happen. It's certainly not a natural law. If I were to give some big structural reasons why it happens, I think it comes back to issues like mercantile capitalism, some things to do with the pressure to expand production and consumption that lead to not this limited amount of displacement. And I want to note that it's actually not unusual beyond the whale example. It's often noted the paperless office paradox. That there was this expectation in the latter part of the 20th century that the development of electronic storage mediums, as in computers, seems like it should let us not use paper. And in fact, as it's well known, perversely, that's not what happened. Paper use increased very dramatically globally. It has somewhat leveled off in the most affluent nations, but the world certainly uses much more paper than it did in the past, even on a per capita level. So there's kind of an irony. I'll also note another commonly observed situation. This kind of came out of the United States with a lot of the freeway development, road development in the post-war era, that there was often this concern about traffic jams. It's kind of a big thing in Southern California, for example, where you had all these freeways, you got everyone driving, you had a lot of traffic jams. So they'd build more roads to try and reduce the traffic jams. And in fact, what often traffic engineers noted, this strange phenomenon, that adding roads, in fact, led more people to drive. Because you take pressure off a road, it takes the disincentive off driving, so more people will drive and tend to plug up the roads. It's kind of if you build it, they will come. Having roads available changes people's behavior. So in that sense, somewhat supply can lead to this, perversely can lead to a rise in demand. Okay, so but I want to come to some of the items. Why does this happen? Why does this displacement paradox occur in energy production? First off, there's a very partial explanation, it's a very basic economic reason. Right? All else being equal, if I add supply, I'm going to reduce costs, right? And then reducing costs spurs demand to some degree. So that's a standard economic phenomenon. That's only a fairly small effect, but that's certainly one thing. And I think that's the most obvious. There are some other, I think, fairly obvious reasons that are kind of more structural. One basic thing is fossil fuel. The fossil fuel industry is very entrenched. It's kind of became over the 19th and 20th century the base energy source for most industrializing economies. So of course there's a huge amount of infrastructure in place to facilitate fossil fuel use. And by this I mean things like literal pipelines for oil and gas, power generating stations based on those. There's also secondary things like road infrastructure. It's a big problem in America, right? The United States puts so much effort in developing freeways and creating urban sprawl that it sets up this strong commitment to car use, which is a major use of energy. And then obviously fossil fuel industry has a lot of political and economic power. So there's some reasons that allow the fossil fuel industry to maintain their position and spur use through how they affect politics and economics despite the rise of potential other sources. I think though getting to a more indirect and broader phenomenon is, as I've already suggested, thinking about in terms of the relation between supply and demand. I think we too often think implicitly that demand is the main reason we do things, that we consume energy because we need it, and therefore we supply to meet our energy. But I really think that a part of this is happening the other way, that supplying is what creates demand. And actually I'll just give an analogy here with which many of us may be familiar. Think about a human body as we need a certain amount of energy to live, right? That's why we eat. We need to eat to live. And so we have a base demand. But one of the problems we have, particularly in affluent nations, and the United States is a prime example of this, where there's a huge amount of oversupply of food everywhere, right? There's junk food everywhere and so forth. If you supply more food, the fact of the matter is people will eat more food than they need. I'm guilty of this, right? This is a common problem. And so providing, and this is of course part of what's led to, in affluent nations, problems with obesity and health problems of overeating, too many calories, right? So there's this kind of irony. Your body needs a set amount of food, but you don't stop eating when that's satiated. People will tend to eat more if it's provided more. And I should actually note there's research on that simple fact that providing variety of food tends to lead people to eat more, which is kind of an irony. So I think there's some element of that going on here too then in energy, where the supply in of itself spurs types of development patterns that set up need for demand. I think we also need to consider important issues of political context. there is a huge, beyond infrastructure, geopolitical commitment that leads to geopolitics to try to control where oil is. And in some ways that would suggest that there's a lot of incentive to move away from oil use, but that of course entrenches certain geopolitical interests. And this has a lot to do with the United States meddling in other countries' economies and affairs politically to control oil supply. But those set up long-term commitments to energy use in those relationships, trade and diplomacy. So there's these kind of structural incentives in place because of the legacy of using fossil fuels to continue using them as a sort of momentum that comes with it. So I want to, so since I know I'm keeping everyone from lunch here, I don't want to go on at great length. I'll just kind of summarize then kind of my key points to thinking about here. And I want to say I don't think I have a single answer to this issue. The point I would like to make to you is if we think of environmental problems principally as technological and seek technological solutions, the actual consequences of changing technologies may not be what we expect. They in fact may sometimes be the opposite of what we expect because of the complexity of social context. So when we're studying environmental solutions and technological change, we need to think about them in a social way, not just a technological way. And in a social way, I mean very broadly to include cultural, political, economic factors. So to summarize that, then I would say that it's obviously necessary, as I said at the beginning, that we develop non-fossil fuel sources, but we shouldn't assume that that in and of itself will lead us to move away from fossil fuels. So we actually need an active effort to try and promote conservation and to try and suppress and move away from fossil fuels, rather than hoping it passively happens through market activities. With that, I will wrap up. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you, Professor York, for sharing your thoughts and research with us. And now I would like Professor Swarnakar to please come up on the stage and give a few motivational words and a word of thanks.
I mean, we are planning to have a rescheduling of the entire first day, and we will show you that. Before that, I would like to thank our Honorable Director, Sir, Professor Deshmukh, our Chief Guest, Professor Parikh, and our Registrar Sir, and all our faculty colleagues and staff, and particularly students who worked day and night in hospitality and all the stuff. And next is our co-organizer, Institute for Social and Economic Change. I'd like to thank Professor Pattnaik and specifically Professor Raju and the entire team of Professor Raju. And next I'd like to thank Mr. Pankaj Upadhyay from Oxford, who has organized many keynote speakers and important eminent persons. So I am really thankful to Pankaj. And last, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Indian Council for Social Science Research, and SAGE Publications, and RC24, International Sociological Association. Thank you. And this is our rescheduling things. We will go directly to lunch from here in cafeteria, and please go to cafeteria for lunch. Thank you.